Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to the batch video for the web novel Thieves Dungeon from the website Royal Road. This video will contain chapters 1.17 to 1.20, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 1.17, Diverging Paths. You have reached the 5th level. You may now choose the final achievement, as this time you may select an achievement of one rank higher than usual. You may choose to receive the bonus schema or an increased mana per hour, or the Great Wheels Worm 2. You may increase Anima, Logos, or Arcana by 1. I was in heaven. In the selected space for achievements where bubbles of possibilities was threaded together on roads of light. And I had finally reached the highest tier, the land of the legendary. The achievement of water promised to open up a portal between my dungeon and the abyssal sea, to cause water elementals and sprites to spontaneously form within my dungeon. The other 3 elemental achievements were very much the same. Earth received a moment's curiosity from me. The land it led to was the endless series of caverns, grottos in the dark. What kind of gems would I be able to find there? What treasures would the earth be able to give me? Of course, that kind of speculation wasn't a good reason to choose the achievement. Oh, but the restraining of my imagination was hard. My future stretched out before me, and I had the luxury of picking a road that I would take, of stealing a glimpse of each of the choices. I found 3 achievements clustered together, 3 bubbles of possibility glowing like stars. Dreaming, contract, and naming. Anima, Logos, and Arcana. Naming promised to make the names I gave grow within owners, granting greater boons with each evolution. It also meant that my spell work would increase in potency, which I assumed would mean my fledgling work crafting shards would rise to a new level. Contract would let me bind those that I dealt with not only the letter, but in spirit, compelling true loyalty, and offer me a mental strength to force my will to the mental jewels. But achievement of dreaming was the most interesting, because until now, I didn't know what Anima's function was. Dreaming's boon was to unite the whole of my dungeon together in a single consciousness, sharing their thoughts and knowledge each night as they slept. So, did Anima relate to my abilities to communicate with my creations? I moved on, examining the achievement of art. Each piece of art I created would gain magical boons, born from its aesthetic properties. It was tempting, very tempting. But for it to be worthwhile, I would have needed to take the achievement of refinement and another choice that would enhance my shaping abilities. Sadly, it was only at the end of my journey that I could see what options were. A dozen or more achievements could have been choices if I'd known which options to take earlier in support of them. Grandeur, fortune, darkness. The choices in the highest tier were endless and bright. But in the end, there was one that caught my eye. Attunement of fortune. A promise, not only of wealth, but of repairing the relations with the gods. A choice that rewarded my focus on shadows and deception. I had 3 choices before me. 3 true contenders. Earth, naming, fortune. Earth for the chance to dive deep and trawl from the earth, rare stones and jewels. Naming for how it would enhance my precious creations and accelerate their growth. Fortune for how it synergized with my previous choices. In the end, I discarded Earth easily. It was only a possibility, after all. And one portal in my domain was causing me enough trouble. The last 2 were more troublesome. Naming focused on what was most important to me, my creations. They were my eyes, my hands, my guardians. They would grow and thrive with this achievement. But I couldn't believe that an achievement that combined with none of my other choices would be more powerful than one that past decisions had built towards. I made my choice. But as I sank out of the selection space and back into reality, I saw something rising up above the supposed highest tier, half faded into a cloud or dark mist. There was one more choice. A bubble of possibilities so enormous that I hadn't even seen it due to the simple scale, mistaking it for a flat grey horizon atop the selection space. A tier higher than the highest, it was dull and lifeless, somehow cancelled out or negated, but it existed. You have selected the achievement of Fortune 1. Each time you level, blazing fragments of sunslug will be sheltered within your dungeon. The longer you can keep them hidden, the more powerful a boon you will receive when they're claimed. As I returned to normal space, I discovered the first token had already appeared in my dungeon. It sat beside me in a hidden alcove above my sanctum. It looked like a shining golden coin, printed on both sides with an image of a sun wreathed in a small, delicate white flames, constantly making the shadows rise and jump. It was made of the purest manner that I had seen. Even looking at it too long made my mind begin to ache, and I quickly turned away. Returning to the choices at hand, I could raise one of my 3 pillars. It was possible I'd be able to raise them every 5 levels. I chose Arcana rather quickly, while expanding my anima was also likely to be valuable, and I really did wish I could speak to my minions more directly. I needed a 3rd name. Adamant. This time the naming felt different. I could feel the way my mana was flowing around Adamant, shifting as the blessed settled onto him, as if the name was a form of gravity, drowning mana out of the surrounding air and inwards towards his core in a spiraling respiration. Along with unlocking a new name, my senses for arcane had vastly improved. Dwarven Eidolon, Adamant. Granted a dwarven spirit, this golem knows the ways of the forge, the hammer and the anvil, the dark underground and the glittering of the veins. Name of the unyielding spirit, by expanding mana, this creature can harden its body into metal. Adamant lifted his hand as the blessing descended. I could feel his mind sharpening, growing more defined, as he realized who he was. Adamant, the unyielding spirit. The one who'd been destroyed and reborn, the one who'd stood in the way of the Eyeblight even when there was no chance at victory. My first true creation, wholly shaped by my own will, crude and clumsy in many ways, but fiercely dear to my heart. He looked towards me for a second, and then at himself. He settled back on a rock, his hand extending before his single eye, and it froze into a stillness I associated with him thinking. I could sympathize. I was, at this point, a little overwhelmed by choices, and more were on their way. You may descend. Every 5 levels you'll be given a chance to deepen your lair, assigning a guardian to your current domain and digging deeper into the earth to claim new ground. Within the domain overseen by your guardian, you will not be able to shape new creations. You will continue to receive mana and souls, but the guardian will claim a share, allowing them to grow. Your chosen guardian will be immortal, reincarnating again and again as the dungeon accumulates mana. I hesitated. I had more to do here. My domain had just expanded again, and I hadn't even fully taken charge of the territory that I had gained on my 4th level. I had begun to extend the mangrove orchard across the lake. Best of all, my domain was a sphere, and with the latest expansion, I should be close to breaking through to the surface if I so wished. So much to do, so little time. So when Argent and her crew of white rats arrived, it took less notice than I should have at first. She pestered me with images, memories of Adamant's shaping, and the diamond necklace that she'd need in a jeweler's window. And by I realized that she wanted me to create a necklace for her. Jewels were one thing that I couldn't create, because they inherently had the ability to contain mana. Trying to shape them out was impossible. The result would simply eat itself and collapse back into the aether. But I could certainly work up on a close enough version. I relied on her memories to guide me, shaping a chain with pyrite tasseled with glittering teardrops of faceted glass. Then she asked me for an iron key. By now, I was curious. Her mind was an open book to me, and I quickly caught up with what Argent had been doing recently. Midnight outings with her crew, the casing of the jewelry store, the meticulous preparation. Argent had always been brave. Now I knew that she was cunning and patient when she needed to be. And do you know what? I wanted in. I'd spent so much time recently reacting to one situation after another. A good jaunt above the surface would do me good. Eyeing the portal, I made the choice that I could probably afford to ignore it a little longer. With 2 new golems guarding the breach and the Marquis sent back with the licky's wounds, I had some confidence in handling anything that came through without needing to rush and raise more defenses. Sealing it entirely was a potential measure, but I needed to expand my biodiversity. Allowing creatures from the unknown into my dungeon was a quick fix to the fact that I was currently working with bugs, vermin, and the occasional bird caught in my spiderwebs. Exploring the Everforest would be a longer-term goal once I'd fixed new golems with shards. But for now, I would focus myself on the very real threat from the world above, and a world that I still barely understood. I would go with Argent, at least in spirit, when she carried out her plan. End of chapter. Chapter 1.18 Filthy Rich. It delighted me to be on the surface again. Everything was fresh, vibrant. I rode Argent's senses as she led her crew up through the surface world. The smell of the city was deep, ashy smoke cracked through the sour manure. The sights were too many to count. We emerged from a storm drain and scuttled through the storm of feet, nobody taking notice of yet more rats in swarms that snuffed and searched through the gutters for rinds and half-chewed bones. We were in a merchant's district. A noble woman's dresses were flashed with luxurious color, and we hurried out of the way of carriages drawn by golem horses made of stone. I took particular note of a man in a sedan chair, carried by two muzzled and chained creatures like a three-way cross between a man, a tusk pig, and a toad. The chains were made out of gold and quite beautifully crafted, but the creatures underneath were miserable specimens. We had two missions today. One was to search out whatever was directly atop my dungeon, looking for potential haunts to inhabit, but I was hoping to find was a good place to burrow up into and take over. Making a false run for a hidden entrance to a dungeon. Creating a bridge between my little world and the world above would be an enormous risk, but so would letting my growth slow. More than once I had come out on top against opponents well above me in strength, but if I kept letting myself be the underdog, well, underdogs normally lose. So today was a day to prepare for our incursion into the human realm. We scuttled through the wood shavings on the carpentry shop, explored the smells of a dozen different market stalls selling everything, from bone statuettes to the gods, to fashionable boots that still stunk of the tanneries. And we found our chance. A small and nearly abandoned bookseller's, and the air of nearly solid with the most of the old books. The shelves were thick with dust, as we scurried along the rafter beams and watched the stall's few customers shuffle through. We were not the only rats there. It would be easy enough to empty this place out. We departed through the high window, squeezing ourselves through the wooden shutters, out into the world of the rooftops. Ash drifted from the chimneys and grey pillars that smeared as the wind blew. The countless birds nestled in here, guarding the little treasures of the nests and eggs. Worse things than pigeons resided up in the loose thatch roofs, of course. We skirted carefully around an owl staring to blink, awake in the world yellowing on onset of twilight. Up here, everything was sloped and steep. The rich houses roofed in clay tiles were the worst. You could never trust that the tile wouldn't slip loose underfoot. I saw a fish darting in the smoke of a chimney, strange, grey-illish creatures that seemed to live in the soot. I saw spiders the size of hands, and for a moment caught a glimpse of a wild homunculi peering out from the rooftop nest. Best of luck, you poor idiot, wherever he was. I saw the city below. A crew of homunculus were carrying candles and lighting up the street lamps, and guard patrols were riding, not on horses, but on bipedal beaked lizards with bright colours of red feathers around their long necks. We darted through hundreds of glimpses of the common lives, running along balconies and peeking through windows, darting over drunken conversations in the street below. It was strangely satisfying feeling to see everything and be unseen yourself. And then we came to the jeweller's shop. Things were just closing, our last customer departing for the night. The guard was being paid his due. The ratty crew were ready. One by one, agile silver-furred bodies made the leap to the jeweller's rooftop, carrying a line of twine, and the rest would scuttle across, carrying the tools of the mission. It was shockingly well coordinated. They carried across fake golden pendant, a fake key, and something that I hadn't had to make for them. It was a glass bottle full of, well, terrible things. chemical scrapings from the floor of an alchemy workshops, and choice tidbits from the sewers, manure adding together into an unspeakable rancidness that singed Argent's nose even through the cork shoved into place. They had spent all day gathering ingredients for the devilish mixture. Beneath, the jeweler had finished sealing the safe. He and his guard stepped outside, chatting idly about the dwarves' dingy ways, and as the old man fished out his second key, we pushed the bottle over. It landed with a crack atop the jeweler's head, sending him to the cobbles. The guard reached to help him, and stopped short, pulling back, clutching his face as the reek hit him with a physical force. They stumbled and lurched like drunken sailors, trying not to be sick. The jeweler was clutching his skinny old hands to his face as a tide of unmentionable drippings landed down his head, mingling with blood. In that moment, Argent was scurrying down the ivy-laden walls with a fake key in her hand. The real one lay abandoned on the cobbles. With both of them distracted, she leapt, disappearing mid-air and reappearing beside her prize. One key was dropped from her jaws, the other was scooped up, and with a flash she was gone again. It was so smooth that they only saw a blaze of silver light, and that could have been anything. Their eyes playing tricks in their nausea of the moment, maybe. The old man grabbed the key, in any case, furiously trying to wipe away the thin slime clinging to his face away from his apron. He waved it at the door. Nothing happened. The jeweler's spell defenses simply failed to activate, seeing as he was only holding a normal iron key. He tried again and again. We watched with glee from the drain as things unfolded exactly to plan. They argued briefly, and the guard continuously trying to step back and stay upwind from the stinking old bastard. The guard shifted us up, of course, but someone had to go fetch a mage, and the jeweler would be thrown out for smelling like a sewer. The old man would stay and watch the shop until the defenses could be fixed. In the end, the old man shelled out a handful of dark iron coins, and the guard went off running towards the rich end of the city. And once he was alone. Once there was no vicious guard with a too-fast sword to bar our way. 2 rats scuttled down the side of the store, hoisting the fake pendant between them. They scuttled right through his line of sight, and his shocked expression, his mouth hanging open for a second, was a sight to see. He darted after them, whipping at them with his apron, and they abandoned their prize to flee into the shadows. What could he assume? But he must have left a piece out when he closed up the shop, forgotten in the confusion. He returned to his safe, muttering all the way about filthy vermin, drawing the key and whispering the words that would unlock the smooth, lockless door. We came out of the drain. Our crew came out of the shadows, down from the rooftops, everywhere. We poured into the ratty flood through the door as he turned, just as the door to the safe vanished. And again, the hilarious slack-jawed expression. We rushed past him. Argent took the lead, leaping up onto his head and biting him on the nose, clawing his face. Her brothers and sisters poured past his feet, leaping up in rows of drawers within the safe and pulling them free. While he howled and tried to pull Argent away, gold and gems cascaded to the floor. With a final, vengeful nip for her brother that took the chunk of his ear clean off. Argent leapt from his shoulders and seized a diamond ring with her jaws, and vanished in a flash of light for the door. Her crew was already pouring out, weighed down with the prizes of one and all. Silver rats carried gold earrings, pearl brooches, and emerald-encrusted bangles. 3 combined their efforts to carry the real article of the diamond pendant that I had duplicated out of the cheap glass and fool's gold. We were frankly filthy rich. They may have been the richest rats in history. While I waited for Argent's crew to return, I disengaged from her senses. I wanted to make my descent soon, and that meant to finish a lot of work in the short order. I finally made my choice. The new schema that I was deeply tempting, and the wheel offered a thrill, but what I needed more than anything else was mana. I was confined to working with small creatures as long as my income remained at a slow trickle. And I was not disappointed. Instantly, my mana rate skipped up by a whole 10 an hour, more than 20 times what I'd previously been forced to work with. I didn't even need to resort to my secret weapon and draw mana from the flower of the divine messenger had left. That I would say for working on a gift for the gods. With my newfound riches, I planted more mangrove trees, wasting no time in pouring out manna into them to make them rise in moments. It was fascinating to watch their growth sped up. The seeds I planted sprouted open with hairy clusters of thin, corkscrewing roots that worked their way through the loose mud to the lake bottom, while a single green shoot stretched up and broke the surface. Everything began to grow, the roots thickening until they lifted the stout trunk of the tree up in the hill wooden flesh, while the sprout turned from green to pale grey as it split into dozens of thin branches holding the canopy of leaves. Dozens of trees went up like this at once, and the people on the shore definitely noticed. From adamant's eyes I watched them retreat from their little village of tents and campfires, waiting to see what would happen next. But I had already expended my reserves. Silent hours passed, and they began to steel their nerves. A few of them, sharp but not exactly wise, realized that the spiders had yet to spread their webs across the new expansion from the forest. Now was the best chance to poach the golden fruit. 4 of them came across the lake in another cheap vessel, this time the raft fashioned of mangrove limbs. 2 men, a woman with a sword on her hip, and a young boy skinny and malnourishment. I didn't have a guess to know who was going to be sent first. The boy leapt from the raft onto the island of roots, balancing unsteadily as they creaked underneath a small weight. Spiders were already prowling through the new wood, looking to expand their territory. He would have to be quick. I did nothing to especially tilt the game against him as he scrambled up the tree and plucked the first root, tossing it down to his companions. Rigging things too heavily would discourage more from coming, after all, and every one of those people waiting on shore too afraid to come forward and seek their fortune. Every one of them was a meal that I was missing out on. They needed a taste of gold to get their courage up. Anyway, I didn't need to do anything to seal the boy's fate. As he dropped down from the trees, the branches picked bare, he found himself faced with a sword. I didn't need to hear what the men and women were shouting at him. "Get back! Get more, you coward, you rat!" I doubted that they would ever let him back on. One more to share the hall with? Why would they want that? He darted along the edges of the forest, leaping between the hills of the slender roots beneath each tree, trying to get away from the spiders slowly closing in. This time, as he clambered up, he didn't throw the prizes down to them, but used his shirt to sling and fill it up, clearly planning on bargaining his way aboard. I watched as his hand reached for a fruit, unaware till the last moment of the jewel-shelled spider clinging to the golden rind. He spotted it just in time, snatching his hand back. A little too hastily, the boy overbalanced, falling backwards out of the tree, gold spilling into the water as he crashed against the roots below. The 3 still aboard the ship screamed in frustration as he grabbed as many of the fruit out of the lake as possible. Real fish and starting to float up from their muddy beds, drawn by the commotion on the surface. The boy leapt aboard just before they could pull him down. Again, a sword was aimed at his throat. This time, the boy held the golden fruit out of the water, threatening to drop them. I watched, hoping with a shred of guilt to see the real fish tendril snake out of the water and pull him overboard. Instead, the woman lowered a sword and the boy huddled himself onto the corner of the raft as they slowly paddled back to shore. I didn't watch any further. Whether the boy survived or not, my role in their drama was done. End of chapter. Chapter 1.19 Midnight. Hayfree had a paranoid itch that she couldn't scratch, a fear that was growing in the corners of her mind. It was a lean time of night when the hope of sleep had been abandoned and the dark hours stretched on endlessly. She had moved to her study and lit the crystal lamp that stood over her desk. This time last week she had Morgul and Olin, if not on her side, then on the side of the city. All of them were in a rough alliance born of a shared satisfaction of Colturn's present order. Now there was blood in the waters, and Avery was beginning to suspect it was hers. She still had her plans, her hopes of playing out the conflict between the other 3 contenders until the dungeon drew enough attention to make her role as a guildmaster mean something. And as for the fact that she didn't believe the other three could defeat the dungeon had killed 2 powerful mages, one in his own home. Well, Olin's last gift would see to that matter. No, she had her plans, but you couldn't hold a plan, couldn't feel its solidity, couldn't clutch it like a blanket. When fear set into Avery, her many plans did nothing to calm her nerves. Instead, she found herself picking at them like a scab, examining every fault. They'd never found the rogue Morgul had hired on, some nobody acting under the name of Lady Grey, who'd vanished as soon as things went wrong. The priestess had refused to speak, and even Avery didn't even have the nerve to touch one of God's chosen oracles. Nobody remained who would tell her what was going on down there, lurking in the dark. After losing her only 2 allies to the dungeon, Avery didn't have the guts to face it head on. And that was fine. The gods gave men fear to keep them alive, and some nights they kept them awake. A knock at the door. "Enter," she called out, surprised by how her own voice sounded in the silence of the study. Her personal guard brought in a young man named Malvit. He fussed excessively with his broad-coated vest and ruffled sleeves of his silk shirt. He was the closest Olin had to a favourite amongst his 3 apprentices. His nervous, sunken eyes darted around the room, but always slid back to Avery's bare legs, exposed under the short hem of a nightrobe. His grin was greasy and too hopeful, reminding her somehow of a rat trying to smile. "You sent for me?" "Olin left you a task. How far did you get before this?" She flicked a hand in annoyance, sitting back atop a desk. Disruption. In answer, Malvit simply donned his thick leather gloves and reached into his satchel, bringing out a pitch-black stone. Grey energy wept from the crack along the smooth midnight face of the stone, making the air turn wriggling and waxy. "I made a dozen of them before I was driven out of my workshops. I can make more. I still have." Avery held up a hand, silencing him before he could finish his sales pitch. "Let me be honest. You're on your last legs, the favoured child, not the smartest, not the strongest. Every hope you have of living to see the end of the month lies in that bag." She held out her hand. "So give it over." He hesitated, but everything she said was true, and the stones were worthless to buy favour with anyone but Avery now, and it was doubtful Malvit understood why Olin had commissioned him to create so many warped mana stones. He had simply done as ordered. Trying to suppress the tremble in his hands, Malvit handed over the satchel. He was very surprised when she shoved it back in his arms. "Good. I like obedience. Tomorrow you'll go back to the Institute and begin manufacturing potions with these. Any kind of potion an adventurer might need. Hire only people you can trust. We can't have news of this getting out. If anyone bothers you, make it clear that you have my support." "And do I?" The little toad hadn't batted an eye in the instructions to produce a massive supply of poisoned goods. She could see why Olin had liked him. "That depends on whether you can keep this quiet. People will figure out what we've done eventually, but I need eventually to not mean tomorrow." Her gaze slid past him, contemplating the portraits of past guildmasters on the walls. If this went wrong, if this was discovered, she wouldn't be given a place on the wall. She'd be given a stump and a swing of the executioner's axe. "Yes, as a matter of fact, I'll go with you, and make sure this is all done properly," she said, snapping back to reality. There was no point worrying. She would make things go right. "So, should I go?" It took her a second to pass the naked greed in his smile, to follow his gaze lingering on her legs, and realize what he meant. She snorted with open contempt. Usually she'd break a limb for that kind of impertinence. But it was late, and she had paranoid thoughts rattling around in her head, needing to be silenced. "No, you may stay. He would have to do." It had been a while since I examined my core. Its center, my beating heart, was a hair-thin rift through which mana poured constantly, creating a fiery aura of magic condensed into a bright green flame. The fire was restrained and harnessed by 5 rings of rune-inscribed gold, revolving slowly around the burning rift of the planets orbiting the sun. The 5th and outermost ring was the brightest, carved with runes that constantly shifted, splitting and merging as if any moment I was seeing a kaleidoscope fragment of a whole. This was my legendary attunement, The other 3 were somewhat easier to examine. The movement of their inner runes were slow, allowing me to begin to memorize them. My goal was to create new, powerful shards. I had turned down the promise of naming, but I could still improve my spellcraft through hard work. Unfortunately, my attempts to concentrate were somewhat hampered by an enormous rhinoceros crashing through the door of the Everforest. Just a little bit. It was a hulking beast, a rocky grey hide crisscrossed with scars, and rather than one horn atop its muzzle, it had a row of long yellow teeth. Tiny, bright-bodied birds followed it through the portal, flitting in all directions and harassing my dungeon's creatures. With stabs from their long beaks in the middle of the storm of wings, the great beast swept its head from side to side, searching for challengers. Its eyes settled on the lion golem. A nostril-flaring snort, the beast lowered its toothy head and charged. The lion responded in kind, and I winced as the clash ended with a flick of the rhinoceros's head and a brutal soaring flight that crashed back down to the ground. It was then that the glass golem arrived, stabbing its lance into the rhinoceros's side. It danced away as the beast swept its toothy head sideways, and now the lion was on its feet again, limping heavily with one forepaw all but crippled. Together they struck at the beast from both flanks, steadily wearing it down. A few times it managed to catch them on the frontal assault. The beast won easily, but the 2 were clever to give him that. The little birds would have made things significantly harder against living creatures, but the golems were immune as the tasty little things tried to peck out their eyes. In the end, the rhino lost its back legs, and the lion's poisoners began to work. Creeping tendrils of mushroom spores crawled out of the numerous wounds on its hide. The final stab from the glass fawn spear struck into its neck, and the beast collapsed. I needed more golems. The incursions were ended quickly, but it showed me that the Marquis was a dedicated man. There'd be more attempts like this in the bloody my nose. What they didn't know was that they were feeding me, granting me mana and new designs to work with. I could work with this. Devouring the corpses of the few casualties of battle left me plenty of mana to work with. With a few hours of energy stockpiled, I had enough to begin filling gems of my rats that I had brought back, piling up the little gleaming horde that they had scampered around, wrestling with one another. Preening and proud of their exploits, I promised I'd find some way to reward them soon enough. The total mana capacity, I was somewhere just over 100, and if I hadn't just gotten a massive expansion to my mana flow, I would have been ecstatic at the small amount of income they gave me. As it was, I could call it a nice bonus to a real advantage, crafting new shards. I'd have to give one to the glass golem. I couldn't begin scouting the Everforest properly. One to the fungi golem to let it command the lazy thing. And last, but not least, one to control the ant queen that I had planted underneath my gardens. This time, I wouldn't settle for a crude, clumsy shard. I would work until I had at least a step forward in quality, and use the rejects to deputize a few more scouts out of the rodents and birds in my dungeon. Anything left over would be left as mana batteries. But there was one last matter to take care of. Argent hadn't returned with her pack. She was coming back now, bloody and battered by the detour that she had taken, but victorious. She hauled with her the hulking corpse of an owl raccoon chimera, dragging it slowly through the sewer tunnels, her whole body stained with blood. I dissolved it into mana as she entered my domain, and she got her share, enough to push her into evolution. She was the last of my 3 children to reach this stage, but I wasn't one bit disappointed with the results. Your creation is undergoing evolution. During this time, mana you give to them will be more effective, and they will be easier to shape. Choose a path. Rat Queen common. With an outsized wit, this ruler among rodents commands lesser vermin to do her bidding. White mongoose common. Foe of serpents, the mongoose is a fierce fighter despite its size, and white ones are said to be immune to poison. Shadow raccoon, rare. Surprisingly intelligent, these creatures shapeshift into humans by stealing their shadows, have a small chance of learning shadow magic with involving. Moonlight rat, Born only from albino specimens, the moonlight rat commands magic and stealth to slip unseen through the world. Owl chimera, mutant, absorbs the trait of the last foe defeated, gains improved eyesight and flight. End of chapter. Chapter 1.20 Underhanded. Trevelyan woke up hungry, hungover, and wrapped in silk sheets. It was the last one that concerned him, as it was an interruption to his usual routine. Sunlight probed insistently against his eyes and stirred the tormented muddle of his skull. He rolled onto his side, cracking an eye open to surveil his surroundings. Somebody had set a sugar-dusted balls of blackberry jelly in a golden bowl on the nightstand. Oh, sweet relief! He grasped a fistful and pushed them into his mouth one by one, savoring the sweetness, and gave away a tart, fresh succulence. He found the strength to ease his eyes open a little more, and discovered that there was a half-full bottle of rum a little further down the nightstand. Oh, salvation of mine! 10 minutes later, Trevelyan was making his way down the grand staircase of the palatial villa that he found himself in, the bottle dangling from his fingertips with the tiny reserve of rum still sloshing around the bottom. The house was rich, opulent, and very much to Trevelyan's tastes. At the bottom of the stairs he found a silver bowl of fruit balanced on the banister. Really excellent taste, Trevelyan commented as he popped the grape into his mouth. Just as he was reaching for another, a servant crossed his path, carrying a tray of glasses and a tall pitcher of wine. In 2 steps he had neatly intercepted them, lifting the tray from her hands. "I'll handle this." "That's for the lady of the house and her guest," the maid stuttered, outraged at a shabby tomcat of a pirate with a clean house. "Yes, and I am the guest, so it's halfway home already," Trevelyan replied. "Now which way to the lady?" The maid pointed him towards the door, and with a tray balanced in hand, Trevelyan arrived at a large dining room. Seated at the end of a long mahogany table was a noblewoman with the expected yes, but she was a dwarf, and not the soft demure lady at all. A scar indented on the flesh of her cheeks, streaks of white marred her golden hair, which was tied into an ornate knot of braids that hung behind her head. She sat with a book open, breakfast shoved to the side, and a wooden box bound with a silver chain sat on the table in front of her. "I was half expecting you to go out the window," she noted, without looking up. She was beautiful in a stout way, he supposed. A fierce warrior woman way, not his kind. He preferred women who weren't skilled hands at revenge. I would never. The box jumped on the table, the chains holding it shut rattled. Slightly unnerving, Trevelyan set the tray down and began to mix water with honey into the wine with a silver stirring spoon. "And to who do I owe the pleasure?" "The pleasure was all yours, Cathara Halfhand." Trevelyan didn't bother showing any contrition. He crossed the long, lonely dining table to set a glass beside her. "And why? You caught my interest with all your talk of this dungeon under our feet. I wanted to hear more." The book finally slammed shut. She regarded him with green eyes. "And you can be quite charming when you're drunk enough." "Should I be getting drunk now?" Trevelyan inquired. "If you want to live, you'd better," she replied in a tone so blunt that he couldn't be sure if she was joking. Pulling a chair out of the spinning it around, Trevelyan sat on it backwards, his arms crossed over the chair's back. "You wanted to hear about the dungeon, yes? Where should I start? You seem to know a lot about it. I'm curious where you learned so much." "Oh, I picked it up from rumors here, and—" The box rattled, suddenly interrupting him. Clearing his throat, Trevelyan tried. "May I just say that I rarely have beheld such a radiant beauty." The box thumped. Cathara's eyes narrowed, "And the experience is one that I shall never forget." The thump. "From this day on, I shall have eyes for no other." Thump. The box shook like it was going to leap across the table and strangle him. Trevelyan tossed back his wine in a single gulp, setting the cup down. He noted quite casually, "You know, I can't help but notice that the box rattles every time I lie." "I can't help but notice that you lie," she replied, "like when you told all those people in the dungeon was half full of golden trees, and even the rats were made of silver. The jewels grow in every branch, and the water tastes of wine." "Well, I've always considered myself a storyteller. My work isn't to tell people with meager what is, but to invite them to consider the beauty of what could be." She did not smile. Her eyes were hard and flinty. "Some of them are going to believe you. They're going to go delving, and they're going to die believing your tall tales. But tell me, and do try to not go around telling stories, where did you learn about the dungeon? You know, I should be growing." Trevelyan hadn't risen halfway from his seat when the guard stepped through the door, and from the other door, and he wouldn't bet on there not being a guard waiting outside the window, too. Damn. Ask him to lie, and it was blue to the face, and Trevelyan would have obliged, but the messy truth always had a way of getting stuck in his throat. In this case, he literally couldn't get the words to come out of his mouth. It was like his lungs had turned to iron. His tongue froze, his mouth hanging open. "Breathe, I know a contract when I see one." She was looking at him with a frightening intensity. "The question now is, are you the dungeon's slave, or did you make a deal with it?" The moment he stopped trying to answer, the contract let him have control over his own tongue again. He sucked in a deep breath of air. "I really can't tell you that." She reached across the table, setting his hand on his. "Let me make this very simple. Are you attuned?" It was at that moment Trevelyan caught the sight of himself in the mirror. No wonder she had slept with him. He looked 20 years younger and thinner. His bald patch had filled in, the wrinkles were gone, and his face no longer sagged so damn much. He was a dashing bravo of a buccaneer again. All looked like one, thanks to the attunement of disguise. "No?" Thump. "A shame. Take him away." The guard stepped forward, and his last moments of freedom, Trevelyan poured and emptied another glass of wine. "Would this damn thing move?" Chorus had never seen something so slow, and he had worked with the laziest and most work-shy, the most utterly useless louse on the face of the earth for 20 years now. This stupid thing beat them all. It was some kind of bear with ludicrously long limbs and a white-mossed face. As they watched it leisurely lopped down the tunnels, every motion so slow, like it was a beast was wading through treacle. The whole work crew groaned as the lard-arsed furzball paused yet again to scrape its mossy green back against the walls, leaving behind traces of curling mushrooms' roots. One of the men picked up a stone and hurled it, the shot sailing in a beautiful arc that went bouncing off the creature's skull with a nice hollowed thonk. It barely reacted. "Well, we may as well take a break for a while." Reaching into his pockets, Chorus took out a leather pouch full of papers and loose tobacco, deftly squeezing and rolling a cigarillo. He lit one thing and lit the fleck of firestone kept on the pendant. The smoke helped to scrub his nostrils clean of the cloying stink of the sewer work. "Pass me the firestone for a second, boss." To his surprise, the dwarf that they called No Nose was kneeling over a little nest of branches and leaves. With his helmet turned upside down, he perched atop the impromptu frying pan. He was gathering mushrooms from the walls in funnel-shaped red ones that smelled like death, and tossing them in with a sprinkle of bacon from his lunch. "Are you really going to try cooking down here?" Chorus made a face, sticking his tongue out. "Hey! Are you Chorus the Broken?" To the old dwarf's surprise, it was a human who was calling him a name. Coming from the opposite end of the tunnel, as the human trudged forwards through the mess of the sewer flow, Chorus's initial impression of a shock of red hair resolved into a messy, unkempt young man with a blunt jaw covered in stubble, his nose bent back enough to leave his face with a sort of bulldog look. "Just told me," the pup introduced himself. "I heard you're the man to talk to about these sewers." "Aye." Chorus took the boy's hand as if it was offered, sizing him up as he shook. With a sword strapped to his hip, and a water skin and a lamp dangling from the other, and a loop of rope cast around his shoulders like a bandolier, it didn't take a keen eye to spot a boy who planned to be an adventurer. It was equally clear, by the lack of scars and carefree smile, that he wasn't yet. I'm looking for the dungeon they say is down here. Have you seen anything unusual about it of late?" He paused, squinting over the top of Chorus's head at the lumbering bear thing. Is that unusual?" "You could say it is, yep." Chorus pushed the smoke out of his lungs and into the swirling ring that bobbed through the air. "You could say it is." "And the mushrooms everywhere, that's new," No Nose mentioned, happily prodding and stirring his morsels bubbling with bacon fat. Chorus glared at him, but the would-be chef was oblivious. I wondered about those. Are there any blockages, maybe? Places where the tunnels have shifted recently for no reason. The boy was grinning ear from ear, as if life was his oyster. Oh, we're on our way to fix a blockage right now. No Nose blurted out. Chorus could have tugged his beard out in frustration. Instead, he sucked in a deep breath and forced himself to nod along. Yep, blockage up ahead. Out of nowhere, tell you what. If you get this damn thing out of our way, we'll lead you there. Deal? Deal. Grinning from ear to ear, Jess Tolney drew his sword and advanced on the furball as it happily scratched its back against the sewer brickwork. They all watched him go. No Nose opened his mouth to say something. Chorus slapped his hand over it. He got in one good hack with his shiny sword of his, barely piercing through the bare thing's hide. That was enough to make it mad. It turned faster than anyone who'd watched it idle about for the last 2 hours would have even thought possible. And it swiped out with its long, long claws. The claw that cut right through the boy's stomach like it was butter. Nearly split him. His top half sort of flopped over backwards, barely held together, and he toppled back down into the flow of the sewage. Why'd you tell him to do that? No Nose asked, his face pale with his appetite gone. Why'd you have to go tell him about the blockage? Chorus dropped his cigarilla in the ground and angrily stomped it out. This ain't a game. The families are counting on us. We're going to go there, we're going to look-see if it's really a dungeon, and then we're going to be damn careful, damn quiet about the whole thing. You hear me? Aye, boss, they echoed one by one, their eyes gone dull with what they'd just seen. They weren't good people or good workers. Neither kind got sent down here. The worst of the worst assignments. But they were all people Chorus had, and he didn't intend to lose them. Chorus, the Broken, it wasn't a name in the proper sense. The first half he'd been born with, given the usual way, sure enough. But the latter was saved for dwarves who were cast out from their own families. Dwarves who weren't even worth calling dwarves anymore. End of chapter. And that concludes this batch video. I hope that you enjoyed. If you wish to support the channel, there are numerous ways to do so down below. Until next time, I hope that you all have a good one. And I'll see you all in the next video. Cheers.